So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's lecture in honor of the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. We're happy that our presenter, Dr. Joanne Collins-Gonsalves, has taken some time off of her busy schedule to bring to us this lecture. And those of you joining us on the Zoom platform, and also those of you who are streaming live on our YouTube channel at Catholic Media Guyana, thank you for joining us. Before I hand you over to our presenter, I just want to tell you a little about her. Dr. Joanne Collins-Gonsalves is an academic historian with a PhD in history. She's a I'm too sorry about that. She is a fellow of the UK Royal Historical Society and managing director of the Historical Research International Inc. Canada, and she's the author of three acclaimed books on Guyanese history, including the history of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, 1914 to 2014, the Portuguese in Business in Guyana, from 1835 to 1935, a history of the entrepreneurship expansion and diversification, and Iris de Freitas Brazao, legal luminary and trailblazer, Caribbean, Canada, Wales, and England in 1896 to 1989. Dr. Joanne Collins-Gonsalves has also authored over 30 research projects, books, book chapters, academic articles, research papers, conference papers, and biographical profiles in total. In Canada, she serves on the advisory board of the Journal of the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society and the chair of the governance and policy of the Edmonton Heritage College Board, just to name a few of the portfolios that our presenter holds this afternoon. She's a Guyanese, of course, and we're happy to introduce to you Dr. Joanne Collins-Gonsalves. Dr. Collins-Gonsalves, good afternoon and over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Slytman. It's an honor to be here to give this lecture. And I thank the Catholic Church in Guyana and Catholic Media Guyana for arranging this lecture. I will be doing a PowerPoint presentation as well, so we can follow along. And so I'll open that up now. Yes. Good day, everyone. As I mentioned, it's an honor to be here to deliver this lecture in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. It is a momentous occasion indeed. On this day, on December 13, 1925, the eastern half of the cathedral was opened at a solemn ceremony, and today I'll be sharing some of my research on the history of the Catholic Church in Guyana, and very, very briefly on the Catholic Church, and more on the cathedrals that were built there from 1825. My interest in the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception has deep roots, and it's very close to my heart. My grandmother recounted to my older family members the tragic 1913 fire, and she was later married there in 1924. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. So I'll jump directly into the lecture. Today, of course, I'll share some of my research on the current, just a bit of it, on the current and previous cathedrals built on the same spot in Brickdam, Georgetown during the period from 1825. The first two were wooden, and the third was built of reinforced concrete, the current one that we have now. The history of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Guyana is tightly interwoven with the growth of the Catholic Church in Guyana. Prior to the late 1700s, there were few Roman Catholics in the colony, as the early Dutch settlers were primarily Protestants of the Dutch Reformed Church and Lutherans. At that time, the Catholic population were mainly the French inhabitants. From the 1770s, there were two known Roman Catholic priests, and during the 1780s, a request was made for a portion of land to build a chapel and a residence for a priest in Georgetown. However, this request was refused. By 1782, the British surrendered to the French, and it was in this year that a new priest began to serve services for Catholics in the colony. While the Dutch officially reoccupied the territory in March 1784, Father Lindijke the new priest was allowed to stay and serve in the colony until his death in circa around 1785. It was not until 1824 that attempts were made once again to acquire land and build a chapel, a venture headed by Father Joseph Rendon. The then governor in British Guyana, Sir Benjamin Durban, granted a plot of land in Georgetown free of charge in 1825 to the Roman Catholic Church. It is the site of the present cathedral, bounded by Brickdam, Camp, and Hatfield Streets and Pollard Place. The foundation stone of this first church was laid on November 12, 1825, and it was completed in 1826 at a cost of 40,000 guilders. It was described as, and I quote, a plain wooden structure laying no claim whatever to architectural beauty and grandeur. That's the structure you see on the screen. A presbytery was later added in 1829, built on the western end of the church on additional land donated to the church once again by Governor Durban. With the extension of land granted, the cathedral and presbytery now stood on lots 32 to 36 Starbrook, Georgetown, a plot of land approximately 310 feet by 200 feet. Originally named Christ Church, the cathedral was later changed to the Church of the Resurrection in 1847. We know this because when I went through Bishop Hines' diaries, he first referred to it in July of 1847 as the name of Church of the Resurrection. With the arrival of the Portuguese immigrants, mainly from Madeira from 1835, the population of Catholics quickly grew. By 1842, approximately 5,158 Portuguese had arrived. This number grew to approximately 25,000 by 1858. In order to increase the capacity of the Church of the Resurrection, a lady chapel was erected on the southern end of the church sometime between 1840 and 1842. Despite this, the building soon became too small for the growing population, and coupled with a termite infestation, the pro-cathedral was considered unsuitable. In fact, in the 1842 petition to the Propaganda Fide of the laity of British Guyana, it was reported, and I quote, "The state of the building used as a church of the resurrection in Georgetown is disgraceful. It has long required painting, the glass in the windows is broken, no hooks to keep open doors and windows, the floor flooded when it rains from the state of the roof." That was in 1842. The structure was subsequently dismantled in 1867, and construction of a new grand cathedral began in 1868. This was, in fact, the first Cathedral of Immaculate Conception in Georgetown. The renaming of the new cathedral was inspired by the great devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary in British Guyana in the 1850s and 1860s, which was as a result of the papal encyclical by Pope Pius IX on the Immaculate Conception in 1854. It was this devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary that continued into the 20th century. For while the first church of the Brickdam location was twice named the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception continued to grace the next cathedral built in the 20th century. This new cathedral was an expensive structure. In 1871, it would cost $100,000. Funds were raised from the parishioners, and in 1869, a loan was granted by the Court of Policy of British Guyana to facilitate its completion. It was finally opened in 1874 and declared one of the finest ecclesiastical buildings in the West Indies. The tower was completed at a cost of $15,000. Tubular chimes, 10 large bells, and a large 10-ton bell were installed in 1890. An interesting fact, and I'll go back so you can see this, is that around 1890, a Gothic-style porch was added to the western end of the cathedral. It was a gift of the then governor, Viscount Gormanston, and his wife, who were both Catholics. Therefore, and this is important to note, while the church was designed by Brother Caesar Castellani, the porch was designed by Ignatius Scholes. While the church was completed, it continued to be furnished and decorated into the new century, and as late as 1912, funds were expended on improving the interior of the cathedral. And here you can see a very beautiful interior of the cathedral. However, by 1913, everything changed when the new wooden cathedral was destroyed by fire. Destructive fires have shaped the major cities of the world. The Great Fire of 1616 in London displaced approximately 100,000 people and destroyed dwellings covering over 373 acres within the city and 63 acres externally. Within the Caribbean, the fires of 1882 in Kingston, Jamaica, 1886 in Grenada, and 1895 in Port of Spain, Trinidad, reshaped these cities. These fires shared the similar issues of overcrowded cities, continued use of wood in building, and the use of flammable materials such as coal pots and kerosene for cooking. These conflagrations were heightened by the often inadequate firefighting facilities within these territories. On the fateful day of March 7, 1913, a plumber upset a coal pot while conducting repairs in the tower of the cathedral. The fire quickly spread. The entire cathedral burnt in approximately 2 hours. The Daily Argosy eloquently chronicled the end of this, and it's worth quoting at length. And I quote, "The flames leaped triumphantly and sank. The yellow smoke rolled again. The charred spars of the framework shuddered and leaned towards each other. The whole fabric dissolved piece by piece into the tossing sea of fire, which hissed and spluttered and spat clouds of steam. As the firemen, relieved from the urgent duty of protecting neighboring buildings, turned their jets upon the dying conflagration. Despite the quick spread of the fire, most of the items were saved. Many of the items were saved. These included almost all of the vestments and sacred vessels, all the registers and records of the church except the baptismal register that was in use at that time, the collection boxes, which still contain monetary donations, Stations of the Cross, the Calvary altar, the baptismal font, the president's chair, the piano, St. Anthony and Sacred Heart statues, and one of the gates. When the cathedral went up in flames, it was felt that the year 1913 would be an unlucky one. It was expressed by some that it was a year of disaster and ill luck. However, deeper issues contributed to the retardation of the firefighting process. Before that, let me go back so you can see a little bit of the photos. So we have a photo from 1913 of the cathedral on fire, and then we have at the end of it the absolute destruction of the cathedral. And I'll go over this again. However, despite deeper issues contributed to the retardation of the firefighting process, these included an outdated water supply system in British Guyana at that time and the occurrence of a drought. The colony of British Guyana was in the throes of a severe drought since September 1911. In Georgetown in March 1913, when the fire occurred, only 0.87 inches of rain had fell. Over the years, this was the lowest registered rainfall for the month of March in 28 years. The drought would have made the wooden building extremely dry and more susceptible to fire. Coupled with the drought experienced in 1913 was the inadequate water supply, which retarded the firefighting facilities. The pressure of the water was insufficient at the scene of the fire in Brick Dam, Stabroek. The water through the hose at the beginning could not reach the roof of the cathedral. Later, it only went halfway up the tower, but it was too late as the fire took hold of the cathedral. It was reported that one fireman climbed into a tree and at the corner adjacent to the tower and tried to play his line of hose on the base of the tower, but it was reportedly no use. The water supply system at the time was insufficient to provide for the growing numbers of the city in Georgetown. In 1881, there were 47,175 persons residing in Georgetown. And by the 1911 census, the population of Georgetown had increased to 57,432 persons. During this time, there was also an increase in the rural to urban migration and expansion of the boundaries of the city. By 1912 to 1913, the Georgetown Town Council recognized the increased need for water, and an order was made for a 10 million gallon engine, which would pump this amount in 24 hours. This was twice the capacity as the then installed machine at the Georgetown Water Works. To acquire this new engine, there was a lengthy debate about the councillors of the Georgetown mayor, among the councillors of the Georgetown mayor and town council. The mayor, the Honorable Francis Dias, lamented, and I quote, "I very much deplore the opposition which was then shown by certain councillors to the importation of the new pumping engine and the inadequacy of the water yesterday, that was March 7, 1913, could not have failed to convince the opposers of the absolute and urgent necessity for a better equipment of the waterworks and the justification for the proposal which was then made," end of quote. He went on to note that if perhaps this new engine was ordered and installed earlier, the fire which destroyed the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception may have been avoided. As a result of the need for an increased supply of water, the then British Guyana Combined Court authorized 200,000 in 1913 for the drilling of artisan wells. The destruction of the cathedral raised the important question of the safety of all the historic buildings in the colony. Mayor Francis Dias opined in 1913 that he hoped that there were no more fires before the new engine at the Georgetown Water Works was acquired. Arrangements for rebuilding a new cathedral began almost immediately. The building was designed by Leonard Stokes, a renowned architect. He was a former president of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and had designed churches and convents in England, and was therefore well suited for this tremendous task. Reinforced concrete was chosen as opposed to wood as a construction of choice of material. The building materials were largely from Guyana. The granite was acquired from Dalga and Wolga quarries in the Essequibo River, and the sand came from Leguan, while the cement and steel were imported. The western half of the cathedral was opened in 1921. The outer walls of the cathedral were completed and rose to a height of 80 feet, and this section was ready for the was ready to be used to celebrate masses. The eastern half of the cathedral opened in 1925 on today's date. The opening of this section was, however, originally planned for Passion Sunday on March 13, 1921. However, for the first section of the opening in 1921, let's go back to that. The opening of this section was originally planned for Passion Sunday. However, Father Paul Miller died on March 4, 1921. He had arrived in the colony in 1912 and served most of his time at St. Stanislaus College, which many of us know, where he was also a headmaster from 1917 until his death. Father Miller was laid to rest from the cathedral a few days later. The cathedral was blessed before his requiem. The plans for the opening ceremony continued, and it was decided that they would proceed with the official blessing on March 13, 1921. So as you can understand, it was opened in two sections, the first in 1921 and the second section in 1925. The Daily Chronicle described the ceremony as quite impressive. Bishop Galton blessed the outer and inner walls. He was assisted by the Very Reverend Father Killian, Vicar General, and Father McCormick. Bishop Galton hoped that within a year or two, the cathedral would be fully built and consecrated. However, the cathedral was not completed until the end of the 1920s and was not consecrated for decades later. The eastern half of the cathedral was opened in 1925. So you had a more complete church at this point in time. In 1925, at a solemn ceremony on December 13th. This date was chosen as it was the first Sunday after the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which was on December 8th, which in 1925 occurred on a Tuesday. As occurred in the opening of the western half, Bishop Galton blessed the inner and outer walls, sprinkling holy water. A pontifical high mass was said, and a temporary altar was used at this ceremony. A high altar was later installed in 1930. So Bishop Galton was keen to have it opened. And so while everything was not completed, they went ahead and opened it and used a temporary altar. While the cathedral was largely completed, and I would like to draw your attention to the screen. The cathedral has wonderful drawings of working drawings that were used to build the cathedral. And as you can see here on the left, we have the original plan of what the tower would look like. And to the right is a projected final cathedral. So you can see the detailed drawings, and then we have an image of what the cathedral would have looked like with the tower. Excuse me. While the cathedral was largely completed, additional work and fundraising continued. In March 1927, a prize drawing was held for a fundraiser for the Cathedral Building Fund. And by 1927, the cathedral was largely completed. In relation to construction, Father Bridges noted that, and I quote, "Some few months later, on the 30th of April 1927, the clang of the hammers at last ceased. The concrete mixer whirled no more. The workers received their final pay, and the compound resumed its wanton peace." End of quote. This signaled the end of the construction. At its completion, the cathedral stood 200 feet long and 100 feet wide. The center ceiling is 60 feet and 6 inches high, while the dome is 74 feet and 10 inches high. The tower, as I noted before, was, however, not completed. With regard to the tower, there were grand plans to include a very ornate tower, which was to be several stories high. It was planned to be 3 layers to the tower: the upper chamber, which would be empty, the bell chamber below it, and the ringing chamber below that. However, the tower, as we know, never came to fruition due to prohibitive cost. While the cathedral opened in 1925, there were yet several important additions to be installed, most notably the altars. And I have a comparison here of what the cathedral would look like and what the cathedral looked like, what it looks like today. And so they did a very good job with the building of the cathedral, and of course, minus the tower. While the cathedral opened in 1925, there were yet several important additions to be installed, most notably the altars, pulpit, and organ. In 1931, the organ was acquired, and in 1939, the altars and pulpit were installed. In addition to the use of the organ, so let me go through and I'll show you. On the screen, you'll see images of the high altar. And to the left, you'll see there we have a drawing of what the cathedral organ would look like. The plan of the organ in 1929. And below that, you have the organ that was used from 1931 to 1993 when it was replaced. And of course, we have what the cathedral looks like now. In addition to the use of the organ throughout the years of the cathedral from 1939 to 1993, recitals were organized for extraordinary occasions. In 1989, in commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the building of the cathedral, organ recitals were held on October 9th and 10th of 1989 by Pereira. This was repeated in 1999 when a day of music was held at the cathedral and included organ performances by Simone Bass, Jane de Freitas, Michael Pereira, and Daphne Scott. So while it was used throughout for masses, the organ was also used at special occasions for particular events. There were few repairs. The cathedral was so well built that there were few repairs over the years. While the destruction of the wooden cathedral in 1913 was disastrous, the new reinforced concrete cathedral proved to be financially prudent decision. The structure of the cathedral was so well built that few repairs were needed, and as such, only recently in the last 2 decades that modernizations and repairs were conducted. Over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, rehabilitations work focused on the painting of the interior walls, the cleaning of the exterior walls, rehabilitation of the roof and driveway, and the rewiring of the electrical circuits. Over the years, modernizations and convenience were added, such as an installation of a public address system, a ramp for differently abled persons, a sanitation block, cathedral railings, and a grotto to Our Lady. In relation to the painting of the interior of the cathedral, in the late 1990s, the painting of the interior of the cathedral was executed in 2 phases. The first was done from October to November 1999, while the second phase was completed before Easter of 2000. The entire interior of the cathedral was repainted at an approximate cost of 1.2 million Guyana dollars. The interior of the church was previously whitewashed as it was too expensive to paint. Color was added to the ceilings as drawn in the original plans. So what they did, they went back and they looked at the original plans and they used that to paint the cathedral. So when you look up at the ceilings now, those are what the architects envisioned originally. In August 2004, selected portions of the cathedral repainted to enhance its appearance for the 90th anniversary, and a festival of flowers was hosted in the cathedral for this purpose. The cathedral railings and the Blessed Sacrament altar are fairly new additions and changes to the cathedral respectively. The rails made of metal will enclose all the central aisles for the church installed in December 2002 at a cost of approximately $160,000 Guyana dollars. With the decorative railings installed, the Blessed Sacrament was removed from the high altar and placed at the altar of the Sacred Heart on December 8, 2002. This altar was therefore renamed the Altar of the Blessed Sacrament. Persons also had access to the Our Lady altar, which is located behind the high altar. The rails were painted in white, and while they are not very high, they are secured with padlocks to prevent easy access to the rest of the cathedral. The washrooms and roof maintenance. An addition to the cathedral was embarked upon in 2006 in the form of a suite of washrooms located in the southern end of the cathedral. The addition was designed by Rodriguez Architects Limited of Georgetown, Guyana. Work began on November 16, 2006 and was completed on December 14, 2006 at a cost of $4.6 million Guyana dollars. Additionally, the complete rewiring of the electrical system within the cathedral was undertaken between 2009 and 2010. In addition to the exterior of the cathedral, the entire roof of the cathedral has been rehabilitated as the original roof was covered with asbestos. In 2002, the northern and southern sections of the roof were redone, and from September to October 2003, the western and eastern sections of the roof were completed. The driveway was also resurfaced in 2003, while some of the windows were replaced. On the exterior of the cathedral in June 2011, a grotto dedicated to Our Lady was installed against the northern wall. It includes a statue of Our Lady with rocks and cascading water. Railings were later mounted in 2012 as a form of protection against vagrants and thieves, who, among other things, have previously stolen the water pump for the grotto. In addition to the use of the organ and the masses throughout the years at the cathedral, recitals were organized for extraordinary occasions. Other activities and commemorations for the cathedral included 1989, a Festival of Flowers, 1992, another Festival of Flowers, 1999, a Day of Music, in 2004, Festival of Flowers, and this year we had a Festival of Trees. In conclusion, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception has a long history dating to 1825, from the allotment of land to the construction of the small pro-cathedral, the Church of the Resurrection, originally called the Christ Church, to the efforts at expansion and later the construction of a new building. The first Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, built in wood in the Gothic style, was opened in 1874 and stood for 39 years until it was destroyed by fire in 1913. The current cathedral, also named for the Immaculate Conception, was built in the Romanesque architectural style in ferro-concrete. The efforts of the Roman Catholic community at the time in rebuilding the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in the early 20th century speaks of their fortitude and determination. It speaks of the leadership of Bishop Galton, who inspired the rebuilding of an even grander cathedral and who drove the planning, construction, and completion of the building with faith. It speaks of the fortitude of a community determined to raise its cathedral from ashes to desolation to build a structure that would last through the ages. This is just a history of the structure of the cathedral. And of course, we still have to have a social history of the cathedral to be written. And I mentioned earlier of my connections with the cathedral, and I want to expand on that. I told you about my grandmother recounting to my older relatives about the 1913 fire. In 1924, my grandparents, Charles and Muriel Collins, were married there. And in 1967, my own parents, Aubrey and Joan Collins, were married there as well at the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception. In more recent history, in the 1980s, in the Brigham Cathedral was a location where I attended one of my first historic tours of Georgetown, organized by the Guyana Heritage Society and led by our very own Monsignor Terence Montrose. In 2004, for the commemoration of the cathedral's 90th anniversary of the start of the beginning of the rebuilding, I was an executive member of the Guyana Heritage Society, and then the president at that time, the late Rizwan Khan, requested that I conduct research of the cathedral. As a result, in August 2004, I delivered a feature lecture to the members of the Guyana Heritage Society. And you can see a photo on the screen there. That's me in 2004, many years ago, in the crypt of the cathedral. And that's where, at that time, the plans were stored. Below the high altar, they were perfectly preserved original plans of the current cathedral and stored there in 2004. They have since been removed. Bishop Galton, as we know, is also buried there. I later did research in the United Kingdom at the UK Archives and at the British Library. And I subsequently, in 2014, I published a book to mark the 100th cathedral of the 100th anniversary. Much of the original research, however, would not have been done without the kindness of so many persons. I acknowledge with great gratitude Bishop Francis Allen, who I know is here today. Thank you for attending, Bishop. And who supported this project by allowing access to the archives of the Catholic Standard. And of course, he later wrote the preface to my 2014 book. Many thanks as well to Monsignor Terence Montrose and Bishop John Passad, who were the previous administrators, for kindly granting access to historical records and photographs of the cathedral, as well as all the persons I spoke to over the years. And the persons I spoke to and who are integrally involved with the cathedral. This is your cathedral, your parish, and your history. I am only here to just tell a small bit of your history. It has been an honor to document it. My thanks as well to the staff of the British National Archives, the Catholic Standard, and at that time, Mr. Colin Smith and Ms. Naomi Collins, and the National Archives Guyana for their kind and ready assistance over the years. Congratulations to the Cathedral Immaculate Conception and the Roman Catholic Church in Guyana on this momentous day. And thank you to the Catholic Media Guyana for having me here today, and to Mr. Joshua Van Slytman for organizing so expertly and hosting today's online webinar. On the screen there, we have just a few images of the 2014 book launch of my book on the Cathedral. And just an image of, and of course, this is not the only lecture. I've also done additional lectures internationally on the Cathedral over the years. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins-Gonsalves, for your presentation today. Of course, we wish we could have gone longer, but for time, I know majority of the persons online will be heading to the cathedral, as you rightfully mentioned. Today is a day 100 years ago that it was opened and had its mass, and so we want to remember that day with Holy Mass this afternoon at 17 hours. And to those of you online and those of you joining us on YouTube, you're invited to that Mass at 5 p.m. this afternoon at the Cathedral. So Dr. Collins-Gonsalves, thank you so much. And we do hope that we can do this again in the near future.
Thank you so much, very much, Mr. Van Slytman. It was an honor for me to present this lecture. And because of, the time constraints, we can't do any questions, but probably at another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining. And of course, if you've missed this, it will be, or it is rather, streaming live. And after the Zoom has ended, it will be saved to our YouTube channel at Catholic Media Guyana. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to see you at 5 p.m. at the Cathedral.
Thank you. Bye.